Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video tutorial, I am going to go over margin and padding in Elementor. So let's get right into it. So what exactly is margin? Well, margin is the outside space of an element, whereas padding is the inside space of an element. First, we'll take a look at margin. So for the purposes of this video demonstration, I'm going to drop in a container, and I will give the container a black background. And inside of this container, I'm going to drop in an image. And I'm also going to set this image, I'm going to give this image a border. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to the pencil and go to border, and I'll give it a solid border with about 10 pixels, and I'll set that to red. Okay, so now as you can see, I have a container, and inside of this container, I have an image, and the image has a red border. Okay. Margin is the outside space of an element outside of the element's border. So the space on the outside of this border would be the margin. So if I come over to the pencil icon and go to advanced for the image, and I come up here and change the margin, notice what happens. Notice how the space on the outside of the border increases. So again, the space on the outside of the element in this case is the image, on the outside of this image's border, as we increase the space, this is the margin. Now the padding is the space on the inside of the element from the element's border to its content. The element's border is this red border here, and the content would be the image itself. So as I increase the padding, notice what happens. The space on the inside of the element increases. This is the padding. Now, if I were to remove this border, and the reason I put the border was so you can have a good visual of how the margin and padding works, because if I remove this border, and I come over here again to the image and come up to layout and adjust the margin and the padding, it almost looks like margin and padding are pretty much having the same effect. It doesn't look like there's really any difference going on. But obviously there is a difference because, again, the margin is the outside space, whereas the padding is the inside space of an element. So as you can see, there is a difference between margin and padding. Okay, so what I'm going to do is delete the image from our container. I'm going to keep the container, but I'm going to just delete the image. Now inside of this container, I'm going to drop in a heading, I'm going to drop in a text editor, and I'm going to drop in a button. And I'm going to change the color of the heading to white so we can see it. And then same thing with the text editor, I'll make the writing white so we can see it. Okay, so I have a container with a heading, a text editor, and a button. I'm going to duplicate this container a couple of times. Now, as you can see, I have 3 containers. 1, 2, and 3. If I close out my side panels, it almost appears as if I have one big container with elements within the container. Obviously, that's not the case. I have 3 containers over here, but there is no space between them, so they're all pushed together so it looks like one big container. So if we want to, let's say we want to put some space between each container. If we want to put space between each container, we would want to adjust the margin because the margin would be the outside space. So we need to adjust the outside space of this container. Right now we can't see any outside space at the bottom because the bottom container is touching the top container. Of course, if we're looking at this top container, the outside space would be the space right here between where it says home and the top of this container. That would be margin. So let's come up to this top container, go to the 6 dots, go to advanced. You see this link values together here? When this is checked or pushed in, any value that you set for the top will also affect the right, the bottom, and the left. So what I'm going to do is unlink these values together. So this way when I adjust one, it doesn't affect the others. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to set the bottom margin to 50. Notice how now there is 50 pixels of margin on the bottom of this container. Same thing if I come down here to the second container, go to advanced, and unlink the values and give the second container 50 pixels of margin. You can see now that there is 50 pixels of margin between each of these containers. Okay, because this is the outside space of an element. Same thing with like the top of this container. If I want to give it give this top container some space from the title, just come to the main container or the first container, go to advanced, and come down to margin and change the top margin to 50. Now you can see we have the same amount of spacing from the title to the top of the container and so on. So let's say I come down to this third container and I go and I change the bottom margin to 50. Notice how nothing happens, right? Nothing is happening because there's nothing below this container. So if I were to come over here now and drop in another container, let me just give it a background color. Now, as you can see, there's 50 pixels of margin on the bottom of this container, which pushes this container down. So hopefully that makes sense. This is how margin works in Elementor. Margin is the outside space of an element, whereas padding is the inside space, which we're going to look at now. So if we're looking at these, I'm going to just delete this container here. So if we're looking at these three containers, you can see how this headline and this button are just almost touching the edge at the top and bottom of the containers. So if we want to control the space on the inside of the container, we would use the padding. So let's come up to the 6 dots, go to advanced. We're going to come down here to padding. Now, as you can see, link values together is already checked in or pushed in by default. This time we're going to leave them linked together because I want to put an equal amount of space on all 4 sides of this, on the inside of this container. So I'm going to come over here and set the padding to 50. Notice how when I change the padding to 50, there's now 50 pixels of padding on the inside of this container. Now I want to do the same thing with these other 2 containers. Come over here to the 6 dots, go to advanced, and change the padding to 50. And then the same thing on this third container. Come to the 6 dots and change the padding to 50. Now as you can see, we have 50 pixels of padding on the inside of this container. See, now our design looks a lot nicer and a lot cleaner with the spacing that we put in. Let's look at another example. Let's delete these containers. I'm going to drop in a new container, and I'm going to give it a black background. And then I'm going to drop in, let's see here, I'm going to drop in 2 more containers, and I'm going to put them side by side. So now we have 2 containers within 1 container. I'm going to set the background color on each of these inside containers to white. Okay, so now as you can see, I got 2 containers inside the main container, and they're both set to white. And on the left container, I'm going to put a heading, and I'm also going to put a text editor, and I'm also going to put a button. And then on the right container, I'm going to just drop in an image, and I'll set the image to this one right here. So as you can see, I have the left column or the left container with some text and a button, and the right column with an image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the text here so we can have a little bit more writing. So on this column, this container here, I'm going to set the padding to 0. And as I set it to 0, you can see how everything is just kind of touching right on the edge. There's like no spacing whatsoever. So again, if we want to control this and give it some space on the inside, we would use the padding, because the padding again is the inside space. The inside space of this container would be the padding, whereas the margin would be the outside space of the container. So in other words, if I come to margin and increase the margin, it's affecting the space on the top of the margin, or on the top of the container, whereas the margin for the bottom controls the outside space for the bottom. Okay, what we're going to do is just focus on the increasing the padding. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to increase the padding. Let's put it to 50. And as you can see, as I change it to 50, look how much nicer that looks. There's now 50 pixels of padding on the inside of this container. And then the same thing on this container here on the right. You know, this image is just about touching. If we want the image to touch the edge, we would just come up here and change the padding to 0. And as you can see, it's touching right on the edge. But say if I want to just put some space on all 4 sides of this image, just change the container padding, set it to 50. So now anytime you drop anything into this container, it will maintain that 50 pixels of padding around the container. Now, as far as the margin is concerned, say if I want to increase the space on the outside of this of these containers, just come to this container here, and let's set the margin to 20. I'm actually gonna link the values together so we can affect all 4 sides. And same thing here for this container. Come up here to margin and set it to 20. Now, as you can see, we have 20 pixels of margin on the outside of these 2 individual containers, and we have 50 pixels of padding on the inside of each container. And then, of course, if you want to center this, not to get off topic, you can come to this container here, and we could justify the content to put it right in the middle. So hopefully this video has helped, and you now have a good understanding of how margin and padding works. And this is true pretty much for any element within Elementor, except for buttons. Buttons in Elementor, so if you come over here to this button, for example, right, and you click the pencil icon and you come up here and adjust the padding is the inside space. But notice what happens. It almost looks like the outside space is being affected, where this is the outside space here. But it looks like margin and padding is having the same effect. It looks like there's no difference between the two, but there really is. So if I come to this image, or this button, come to the pencil, go to advanced, and I'll give the button a border, kind of like what I did with the image earlier. Let me give it a red border. Now you can see I have a red border going around this button, around the element. So if I come over here to the pencil and adjust the margin, you can see the margin is the outside space of the border, whereas the padding is the inside space. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete this button, put a new button on here. If you want to control the space that's on the inside of this button, you would do that on the Styles tab of Elementor. So when you're on the pencil, or when you click the pencil for the button, come to Style, and you'll have padding over here. This is the inside space for the button itself. So hopefully you found this video tutorial helpful. If there's something else you would like to see, please feel free to leave a comment. Also, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification to be notified when I come out with future videos.